Are you struggling to come up with original content week in and week out? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients, let them talk about what they care about most, and never run out of content ideas again. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Jim Marsh. He is the president and CEO at Tufsud Global Risk Consultants. Jim, how are you doing today?
Very good. How about yourself, Logan?
I am doing fantastic, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be talking about leading transformational change. I think a lot of leaders really want to transform their organizations. They have a vision for the future and they want to get their company to that spot that they envision, but there are a lot of steps you need to take along the way. And I love how you and I were chatting a little bit offline before we hit record on some practical steps you can take to be very methodical about that. But before we jump into your applications for listeners today, I would love for you to share with them a little bit of background on yourself and what you and your team specifically are up to at Tufsud these days.
Okay, thanks, Logan. Well, I've been in the property risk management field for most of my career. I've moved around the larger organizations in this field, spending time in the areas of account management, sales, client relationship management, and eventually doing what I'm doing now, president and CEO of the organization. During the journey, we did a management buyout of a $24 million firm, where in about 10 years period, we grew it to an annual turnover of $58 million. At this point, we then sold the firm to the parent company where I'm at now, Tufsud, which is a 2.4 billion euro German-based company. Following this, a big part of the integration process involved leading transformational change, which really is the topic I'd like to share with the audience today. What we do exactly is a property risk engineering firm dealing with very large multinational clients based throughout the world to help them better manage their portfolio of property risk, both for themselves and as they go out to the insurance market.
I love it. So, Jim, it sounds like we're going to be sharing some specific tips, from your own experience. And I think those are really where the valuable nuggets are in the things that we're able to share with our listeners through this show. So let's dive right in and talk about some of the practical steps in leading transformational change. As you put it earlier in the conversation, the first one is creating a sense of urgency. Tell us a little bit about why this is important and how leaders can really do it effectively, in your opinion.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, first, a sense of urgency was really needed to permeate the various layers of the organization. And this was aligned with the Board of Management's assessment of the market and our overall goal to innovate and digitize to leverage our strengths and be first movers in this inspection, testing, and certification market.
That makes total sense, Jim, as a place to start with creating that sense of urgency so that you get everyone, starting to row in the right direction with some sense of urgency behind them. So the next step that you're typically looking at that you shared with me is forming a guiding coalition. Tell us a little bit about this next step in the process as you lead change in your organization.
Okay, perfect. Well, there were various executive councils and other steering committees that had to be established in the last so many years, aimed at fostering synergies, breaking down barriers, and encouraging collaboration. This really resonated in the continuous development of our leadership and strategy to best align with the organizational efforts to foster the synergies, break down barriers, and encourage collaboration towards our common goal. Breaking down the silos themselves within an organization is always difficult, but we found that collaboration between different groups on projects is always a good way to start sharing this vision we call one to sud. If you have expertise in one area and work on a project with someone who has a different skill set, you're able to foster that relationship while at the same time optimizing knowledge sharing. This, from what we see, can lead to better expertise and service to provide clients with. So rather than considering yourself to be part of, say, one team, consider yourself a part of all teams and the organization as a whole. So we see that combining engineering, executive, marketing, and sales efforts, we are able to better prepare ourselves for upcoming market developments.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As you drive alignment at the leadership level, then it's much easier to have a common message, spreading throughout the organization, especially a large organization such as yours. So the next step, Jim, that I know you want to touch on is really creating and communicating a vision for the future. So once you've kind of rallied the leaders cross-functionally to be able to have this conversation, tell us a little bit about the next step in the strategy of casting that vision for the whole team.
Well, Logan, you hit it right on the head. The goal was to create and communicate a shared vision, which certainly is always challenging. But really, thanks to the support of our leadership team, which is key in this, we've made significant positive advancement in the area over the last, let's say, so many years, while still keeping focus on our long-term quest to double the size of the business and maximize efficiency and top-line growth simultaneously. So as a result, we've established higher expectations for our people, which has enlightened and inspired most to strive for higher levels of performance. Our hope in this vision of high-performance teamwork is built on trust, communication, and a dedication in providing the valued services we always have, which will inspire others to adopt, hopefully, the one to sud vision.
Mm-hmm. I love the way that is phrased. And as you're casting the vision, Jim, I know the next thing really is planning for the next phase when you start implementing, okay, what are we doing differently now? What are our next steps? So you have to, once you've cast the vision for the long term, you have to, start that 1,000-mile journey with a single step, as they say. What's your advice for folks in that first step of the journey here?
Well, and obviously the first step is the biggest part of this whole thing, but we saw, which is key for this effort, as the next step, to be focused on the transparency and consistent communication of short-term wins, which enforces the collaborative approach being taken to this new initiative and, more importantly, celebrates progress. The recognition of such small victories further encourages colleagues to put their best foot forward and acknowledge their contribution to the greater goals at hand. This we can relate back to our Kaizen, continuous improvement exercises, and efforts to facilitate change, track progress and key metrics along the way, and communicate improvements that are being made. This supports our most important leverage points throughout our businesses and functional areas, and the associated actions require alignment and, of course, commitment to execution. Without this, we'll retreat back to our silos and jeopardize our opportunity to fulfill the shared vision. Maintaining shared values and collaboration better prepares us for the adapting needs of clients and promotes agility in providing best practices, executing strategic account management, and encouraging innovation. So by sharing our knowledge between divisions and regions, we are better able to provide the expertise that clients need and approach us for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're saying there in creating, best practices and sharing knowledge cross-functionally, I think, especially in larger organizations, it can break down those silos that you talked about. And we've talked about on this show, between sales and marketing and operations and different functions within the business before. That communication is vitally important. So Jim, you talked about earlier creating a sense of urgency, forming a guiding coalition so that you have alignment at the top level. If you're going to have alignment cross-functionally throughout the organization, creating and casting a shared vision with the emphasis there on shared, and then planning for those next steps and creating some short-term wins. The last step is really taking the new approach that you've started on and really institutionalizing it. Tell us about why that's important and some steps that folks can take there.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you can't bring it all together and make it a common practice, then you're going to just fall apart and more or less go back to where you were. But so we saw that this involves the consistent succession planning and identification of talent for next level growth, which, as we saw, is key to helping us reach our goals. We honestly feel that adoption of this path needs to be embodied across everyone in the organization, from executives, management, and within different teams and service lines. If you manage a team, certainly you should lead by example. Encourage your group to assist in projects within other groups. Take initiative and ask for collaboration yourselves. Innovation comes from different ways of thinking. If we only follow the same processes we always have, we will never bring in new ways of thought. Always keeping an eye on emerging trends and ideas, obviously, is key. There are themes we see emerging in terms of market movement, specifically, that will definitely lead to business development in the future. And this is where a one-to-sud mindset will help. By sharing experiences and expertise, we will be able to get a bigger picture on the state of sustainable growth for the future. Certainly, it should be noted that for any organization, a continuous assessment of its strengths, specifically when it comes to its people, is essential to ensuring the right people are aligned with the right goals to help execute and set up for future success.
I love it, Jim. Well, that is great advice for folks to keep the mindset of, one team, in your case, one-to-sud, as you guys move forward and continue to row in the same direction. I don't know why the rowing analogy is just always in my head, but we talk about that internally within the team here at Sweetfish. So that's just what I tend to go to as a mental picture. I love the framework that you're talking about here, from creating a sense of urgency on through the next steps in leading transformational change, and rounding it out with how do you instill that new approach into the entire culture of the organization and really keep it going so that you capitalize on your early momentum as you're really trying to transform the entire organization and where you're headed. Jim, this has been a great conversation. I love any good conversation on leadership in trying to scale your business and take it in a new direction, because it does take a special set of skills and leadership in order to do that. So if anybody is interested to take this conversation further with you, ask some follow-up questions related to this or anything else that might be related to the conversation we had here today, what's the best place for them to find you, or best way for them to reach out, Jim?
Oh, well, I would say probably the two best means are, one, via LinkedIn, and certainly via my email address, which is james.marsh@tuvsud.com.
I love it. Thank you for spelling out the German name there on the domain. Make it nice and easy for folks. And we'll link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes to make that easy for folks as well. Jim, I appreciate you being on the show today. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you, Logan. Really had a great time. Look forward to doing it again.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.